We always plan too much and always think too little. Joseph Schumpeter.
Are you ready to make the most of the only life you have? To make smart money choices focused on achieving what you care about most? Here to help you balance living well today without sacrificing your tomorrow is the Retirement Answer Man, Roger Whitney.
I'm just going to come right out and say it. Retirement planning, as it's currently done, most of the time, is completely broken and is not serving you and helping you make the most of the only life you have. Now, this goes whether you are doing it on your own or using an advisor. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's start with doing it on your own and just using a normal resource that someone might use. Let's go to a very popular online firm and look at their retirement savings calculator. And let's imagine that it's Stan and Barbara. And Stan and Barbara are 55 years old. They've saved and invested for decades and felt like they did a pretty good job. And now, at age 55, they've had their children almost out of college, and they're ready to start thinking about slowing down in whatever work that they do. So they say, well, hey, let's pull out the iPad and let's see what kind of retirement is possible for us. So Stan pulls up the iPad, and they go to this online calculator, and the first step is to tell us a little bit about yourself. The first question Stan and Barbara have to answer is, okay, how old are you right now? Well, they both happen to be 55, so that's real simple. So they enter their age of 55 years old. And the second question is, what age do you plan to retire? Well, they haven't really pinned this down, but they want to be somewhat reasonable, so they enter age 62. That seems like a good age, 7 years from now, so it gives them some flexibility. So they put down 62 as the retirement age. Now, the next question that they're asked gets a little trickier. What is your investment style? Well, what does that mean? What is an investment style? So they click on a little question mark button and they get a loose definition. It's based on your risk and your return expectations. And there are 5 categories that they are presented as options: conservative, moderately conservative, moderate, moderately aggressive, aggressive. They don't know. They've just been saving and investing for decades. So, well, we're sort of aggressive, but we're sort of conservative. Why don't we just choose moderate right there in the middle? So they choose a moderate portfolio out of the radio buttons they have to select, which is about a 60% stock, 40% fixed income portfolio. And the software tells them that since 1970 up until 2015, that had an average about 9.5%. Seems sort of high, but it's in small print, so they don't pay much attention to it. So that's telling them a little bit about themselves. The next section, as they sit there with The Office playing in the background on the TV, is getting some information about their financial situation. So they're asked, well, what is your current annual household income? Well, Stan and Barbara have done pretty well for themselves, and they make a combined $150,000 a year. Pretty impressive. They've done well. Now, the next question is, well, how much have you saved for retirement so far? Well, between their 401ks and a little bit of a taxable investment account that they've built up, they feel like they've done pretty well at age 55. And in fact, they have statistically, especially if you consider they had to raise a family and put them through the kids through college and everything else. Their combined investable assets for retirement is $1 million. That's pretty impressive. You know how hard it is to save $1 million? It's pretty hard. So they've entered what they've done so far. And then the next question that the software asks them is, okay, how much do you plan to save each year between now and retirement? So they've always heard that you should be able to save 10% of your income to get you, and that's a reasonable amount to be saving towards retirement. So that's what they've been saving. That would be what, $15,000 a year, right? But Stan and Barbara are sitting there looking and they're motivated. Well, you know what? Maybe we could up that since the kids are almost out of school. Let's say we're going to save $20,000 a year, a little bit over our 10%. So they enter $20,000 a year. Makes total sense. Now comes the big question. How much will they need in a lifestyle budget during retirement? What are they going to spend, including taxes? Well, they really don't have any clue about this. I mean, who does? When you're just living your life, most of us don't have a clue of what we're spending now, much less when we're in retirement. And yeah, there's rules of, 80% of what your income or 70% of your income. And Stan and Barbara, they don't want to live any less than they live now. They like their lifestyle. They're excited about the future. Although the kids are almost through college, they're thinking about travel. They're thinking about hobbies that they want to pursue. They want to live. They don't just want to sit on a park bench. So if it's inclusive of taxes, they sit there and look at each other and they say, you know what? If we're making $150,000 now, why don't we just cut that by a third and say we want to spend $100,000 during retirement? That seems pretty reasonable, don't you think, Barbara? So they enter $100,000 as their spending budget during retirement. Now they click the button in this 3-step retirement calculator on this popular online broker website for their retirement analysis. So when they click on the button, the new screen with the results of their analysis loads onto their iPad, and it says that at age 62, you will need $2,524,100 to achieve this retirement dream that you've just dreamt up on your sofa while The Office is playing in the background on the TV. So, for those of you that have read some of the popular books that talk about retirement being a number, not an age, or those ideas of what's your number, whether their number is just over $2.5 million. Here's the problem. Because the software, and it has a beautiful graph to show this, actually shows a deficit. It says that they're based on their current assets, the fact that they're moderate investors and they're saving $20,000 a year, that they are going to have a shortfall. They are going to be $90,500, short of their retirement goal. And then below that, there are some really cool toggles that you can move up and down on your retirement age or your annual contributions or your annual spending to try to come to a solvable solution. But below that, and this is what I love, they have in big bold letters, here are some possible ways you can take to get on track. Well, we all want to be on track, don't we? We don't want to be off track. We don't want to be lost. So let's look at some of the recommendations or possible ways that they can get on track in this retirement scenario. Now remember, Stan and Barbara are sitting on the couch, starting to dream about their future, and this is their first step to see what could be possible. So, way number 1, change your retirement age to 68. Sure, we'll just work another 6 years. Or increase your retirement contributions to $108,000 a year. Remember, they make $150,000. Let's live on rice and beans today. Or way number 3 is reduce your spending while in retirement to $64,700. That's inclusive of taxes. So that's almost a 40% decrease in their lifestyle during retirement. And then finally, investigate some options and ideas for retirement savings. And then it has a little hyperlink. And if you click on that, it starts talking about all the investment solutions that the firm might be able to offer. How do you think Stan and Barbara feel after this exercise? They're sitting there, age 55, million in assets, saving over 10% of their income. And they're basically told, look, you're going to have to work 6 more years. You're going to have to save 2/3 of your income or reduce your spending in retirement by almost 40% if you want to live a life that you've thought of here on this couch. Do you think they feel motivated? Do you think they feel empowered to create a great life based on a calculator like this? Does that retirement number really mean anything if it's almost unachievable? Here's the rub. Their next step might be, wow, we need to get professional help. We need to go to a financial planner to build a retirement plan to figure this out because this isn't good enough. Well, here's the rub. If they go to a normal retirement planner or investment advisor, they will go through some of the things we're going to talk about on today's show, but the end result typically will be a lot of the same options they're given with this online calculator. Now, why is that? Well, as a financial advisor for over 25 years, having been trained at major firms, I understand, and you may not, is that almost all financial advisors are only trained on investment products, savings, and sales presentation. Your life, whether it's an online calculator or working with most financial advisors, is boiled down to a simple math problem. That's a problem. That's a problem that we're going to try to address on this show, right after this disclaimer. Don't take advice from me on the show. This is Helpful Hints in Education. We're going to talk about some investment concepts. We're going to talk about a structure, but none of this is meant to give you advice because I don't know anything about you. I only give advice to clients I work with because I work for them as a fiduciary and I know enough about them to give them advice. So think of this as Helpful Hints in Education. And before you make any decisions, talk to your financial advisor, your tax advisor, or your legal advisor because that's just common sense. Now let's start exploring what's wrong with the way retirement planning is done today. So if Stan and Barbara aren't happy with the online calculator that gave them those really unattractive levers to pull in their life, save a heck of a lot more, like 2/3 of your income, or when you retire, live on 35-40% less, or, work 6 more years and then it'll all work out. If they're not happy with those possible solutions, it's possible that they engage a professional to help them walk through a process to come up with a more robust plan for their retirement. So let's assume that Stan and Betty reach out, they contact a financial planner, maybe they got a recommendation from a friend and say, hey, we're 55, our kids are almost out of college, we're ready to think about our future, we'd like to develop a retirement plan, can you help us? And this particular person says, sure. So they accomplish step 1 of the financial planning practice standards, which is to establish and define a relationship between the client and the advisor. In many cases, they go on to the next step, which is step 2, which is the gathering of client data, which makes total sense, right? This advisor doesn't know anything about Stan and Barbara. So the advisor is going to do one of 2 things. The advisor is either going to send them a questionnaire for them to complete so he can gather all the crucial data that they need to start working on the plan, or they're going to invite Stan and Barbara in for a meeting to collect the data together. Now, if they send the data form to Stan and Barbara, they're going to receive something that I'll admit I have sent out in my career because this is how I was trained, data gathering forms that sometimes can go past 50, 60, 70 pages asking, obviously, the normal data. What are all your assets? How are they titled? Where are they held at? How are they allocated? To build a net worth statement, what income sources do you have? Pension-wise, Social Security, what's your income now? What are you saving? Where is it going? Things that are logical, but most nobody has organized. but also asking questions of, okay, when do you want to retire? How much do you want to spend? How much risk are you willing to take? All these other things that we don't know. We don't know with any clear vision, because if Stan and Barbara are 55 and their desire to retire at 62, they're just going to use roughly what they're spending now or some fraction of that, because they don't know what they're going to need to spend in 7 years without some context. So these questionnaires many times end up getting put on a table and not addressed for months because it's a big pain in the butt to go fill all that stuff out. I know, I've done that I remember my estate plan. It was a huge document and I knew it was important, but it wasn't too motivating or didn't spur creativity on my part. The other option is that they come in for a meeting with the advisor so he can help gather the data and make that a little bit more interactive. Well, you still got to gather everything in detail all up front. So that means rather than fill out a questionnaire by yourself in your home, you meet in an advisor's office typically for 1.5 to 2 hours, simply for them to ask you very detailed questions that you probably don't have most anything on hand for, and still having you guesstimate about the future so they can get all the information they need to input. Still not that exciting. It's a bloated meeting that you have to sit through for a very long period of time. Now, you think I exaggerate. In offices that I have worked in, I have walked past conference rooms on my way out for a meeting or for lunch and seen couples like Stan and Barbara sitting in a conference room, looking up at a big screen, talking to the advisor, and then come back 2 hours later, still to see Stan and Barbara barely hanging on, asking for bathroom breaks because they're still going through the planning process. No joke. Once the advisor has gathered the data, in whichever form, then step 3 of the financial planning standard is to take that data. The advisor takes that data. He or she analyzes it and evaluates the client's financial status. And then in step 4, develops and presents financial planning recommendations to, in this case, Stan and Barbara. So during the recommendation phase, once the advisor's done all the work and come back and presented their conclusions, they're going to have an analysis of whether they can achieve their goals, and then if not, what they might have to do to achieve their goals. And I'm going to be honest here, pretty much the options presented to Stan and Barbara are going to be fairly similar to the online calculator, because most financial planning, in my experience, is still simple math, meaning that it only focuses on saving and investing as the biggest lever that someone can pull in their life to create a great retirement. So if Stan and Barbara are still at a deficit to what they need to be, it may be more robust in the sense it has Social Security, it has some tax things, the analysis might be a little bit more robust, but it's still going to boil down to save more, spend less now, retire later, spend less in retirement as the possible levers for Stan and Barbara to pull to achieve their goals. Oh yeah, and we're going to have all the stuff on disability insurance, long-term care insurance, life insurance, and all the rest built into this bloated process so it can be holistic. And then step 5 would be, assuming Stan and Barbara resign themselves to, I guess these are the levers that we have, then they implement the financial planning recommendations. And then step 6 is to monitor whether Stan and Barbara are saving enough and whether the markets are giving the returns that they need. So let's sum that up. We got big questionnaires, we got long meetings, we got bloated financial plans, these huge documents, sometimes put in leather-bound documents that no one ever opens again because they're half filled with disclosures. We have focus on saving and investing as really the engine of the plan and not much else beyond that. And then everything is predictive with these huge assumptions on markets and savings and interest rates and everything else built into the plan. That's what we get with rigid planning, which is typically how I see it done. Now, what's the impact of this rigid planning on Stan and Barbara? Well, first, going through such an engagement is going to stifle or kill off any interest in the retirement planning process and shut down any creativity to take proactive measures to create a life they really want. Number two is it's going to steal away all the power that Stan and Barbara may have in their life to create an amazing life. Because it's all relying on these outside forces. It's relying on the markets working. It's relying on financial assets. It's relying on the economy. It's relying on how healthcare costs play out. So it basically steals all the power away from them. Now, if they implement this plan, they feel totally dependent on all these assumptions working out somewhere close to where they're going to be and relying on the advisor to hopefully have done it right enough and to be awake if things change in a different direction. So they don't have a lot of power because they're presented very few levers. That's the result of this rigid planning process. Now, this process worked for the most part for your parents. And here's why. Your parents had pensions typically, not just financial assets. Your parents, for the most part, had pensions plus Social Security, which covered a lot of the cost. You, on the other hand, if you're like the majority, have mainly financial assets in the guise of a 401k and personal savings and IRAs. And if you have a pension, most likely it's not as robust as it was for your parents. So that's one reason why it worked for them, but it doesn't work for you. The second is, for your parents, typically they had an expectation of 10 to 15 years in retirement, just based off of when they retired and average mortality. So they had a 10 to 15 year time frame to try to solve for, much of that covered by pension and Social Security. Today, if we're looking at a Stan and Barbara, we're planning for a minimum of a 30-year time frame. We'll assume that that Barbara would probably pass away at age 92, and it could be a lot higher. So rather than a 10 to 15-year time frame, we're planning for a 30 to 40-year time frame because we got to make sure that things work out. So you have more financial assets, less guaranteed income, and we're planning for a very long period of time. In addition to that, one reason why this more rigid process worked for our parents was that they lived much more local, laid-back lives. They were generally doing more physical work. They were less active. They were less mobile than you and I are, or you and I will be. So they were looking at retirement more as being on the park bench of life. Whereas if I talk to a retiree or someone that like a Stan and Betty today, if I talk to you, my guess is you're looking at retirement as, hey, this is my chance to live. I get to actually pursue the things I care about most. So in your parents' case, spending was a lot less and a lot more predictable. For you, your spending may be more because you're doing things, you're traveling, you're experimenting with hobbies and everything else. Couple that with all you have is financial assets. And we're planning for 30 to 40 years, not 10 to 15 years. You can see why this worked for your parents and didn't work for you. Oh, yeah. And from the financial asset perspective, for your parents, because they were really just trying to supplement their Social Security and their pension, investing became about income investing, the clipping coupons. And I still see that mentality today of just generating income and clipping the coupons. But if you're going to plan for a 30 to 40 year retirement, you're going to have growth too. So the equation becomes much more difficult. That's why if your life is boiled down to a simple math problem, the number never works. The math is too hard. And rigid planning doesn't go much beyond that to help you create the life that you're looking for. So I'm going to go back to the quote at the beginning of the show. We always plan too much, and we always think too little. Sometimes I worry that that's what's happening when we're doing financial planning and trying to figure out how to have a great retirement. So the question is, how do we stop planning so much and building these huge documents that are meaningless? And how do we start thinking more so we can work towards the life that we want? Now, I'm not going to sit here and say, I have all the answers. I don't. I'm trying to muddle through like everybody else. But what I want to talk about is the process that I've developed and iterated over my 25 years that I think is the best solution that I've found to address working towards a great retirement and feeling empowered, helping clients feel empowered to take positive action in their life. So my process is called Agile Retirement Management. So where did that come from? Let me give you a little bit of back history here. So I'm going to go software development. So software development for years was done in something called a waterfall methodology, which is very much like the rigid financial planning that we see today. Every step was a big step. It had to be completed until you moved to the next step. And what ended up happening was, at the end of it, you had these big bloated pieces of software with tons of features that nobody really used that were packaged and then shipped to a client, you and I. You're probably old enough to remember getting big software packages and having it take hours to download. And then a lot of times they'll have bugs in them, but you only really got an update in the software every 2 or 3 years because it was such a bloated waterfall methodology process to make changes. And you got a lot of things that you didn't really want in the software. Well, that has changed for the most part in something called Agile project management. It's a whole methodology in the way that software is mostly developed today. So what is the Agile methodology? Well, it's a lot more adaptive than predictive. Rather than predicting everything up front and building for it, it's much more agile and adaptive in nature. And it focuses more on change management than getting it right the first time. So a great example of it is you probably have a smartphone and you probably have a bunch of apps on your smartphone. Most likely what's happening is, and you'll see it in the App Store, is the apps on your phone or even on your computer, they're updating very quickly. Usually an update on an app, if not every couple weeks, every couple months, you're seeing apps come out a lot leaner and then have all these updates that are happening continuously. That is a result of this agile project management methodology. So if we think of rigid financial planning, which are these big bloated engagements, and we equate that to waterfall software management, which is a big bloated way of developing a big piece of software, we can also think of this agile methodology, one that is less predictive and more adaptive, as something that can be of real use when we're trying to create a great life in retirement. So that's where I got the name from, Agile Retirement Management, which is the process that I use in my practice. And so I want to talk about some of the principles of that and how it might help you create a better retirement. So to end here, what I want to do is I want to walk through some of the impacts I've seen with people that have gone through this Agile Retirement Management process that I've developed. And it's a constantly evolving process, just like an agile methodology would require, right? Well, the first impact that I've seen with people is that they feel much more empowered about their financial future. Because rather than be a predictive, bloated framework that solely relies on saving and investing as the solution, this Agile Retirement Management process, or ARM, empowers the individual with many more levers in lifestyle choices and acting on opportunities and mitigating risks that are well beyond just simply saving and investing. And we talk about them all the time on this show. in that sense of, hey, I have some control over this. I'm not just reliant on the markets or reliant on interest rates or reliant on my advisor. I have control to make lots of little right decisions to create the life that I want. That's pretty cool to see. The second is, I love how it promotes creativity, where people are really thinking outside the box about how their life is and what they want it to look like. For Stan and Barbara at age 55, we've fallen into a normal structure of life, and entering retirement can be a whole new ballgame where you get to have a blank canvas to create what you want. And it's cool to see people think creatively about what could be rather than just continuing what is. The third is, I like that this Agile retirement management process really helps identify change really quickly. And now obviously that's going to be change in cash flow and finance and risks. But I'll tell you, oftentimes the most change occurs in what people want, in what their basic needs are, and what their wants and their desires are. That's where I see most of the change. What I've found is people that are using this Agile retirement management process are constantly saying, well, yeah, that's what we wanted, but we think we want this now. How do we start making the adjustment that direction? And it identifies those changes so quickly that they're more empowered to be able to affect them efficiently rather than just having them sneak up. I think that's pretty cool. Thirdly, I see that it really promotes intentionality, meaning that people are thinking intentionally, what can I do? What can I do? What's the steps that we can do together? What can we do rather than reactively, which is how most people manage finances. And then lastly, and I think this goes to the empowerment part, is properly applied, this Agile retirement management process gives you a framework to realize you don't have to figure it all out, accept all the uncertainty, and focus on how do you have the right framework to have the right cadence of little conversations to manage change as it unfolds. It's no more focusing on what's my number? How much should I be saving? What are the markets going to do? Where will inflation be? Is healthcare costs going to eat my lunch? When should I assume I'm going to die? It's not on trying to figure out the future. It's trying to manage change to create the best only life you have. Well, I guess you could say this episode was my Jerry Maguire letter. This is my manifesto. This is what I am doing every day in my practice with clients. This is the stuff that I'll be talking about in the framework that I'll be using to help you make the most of the only life you have. I appreciate you listening. It was a little bit of a rant today, I know. I so love spending time with you each week. I'd love your feedback. Go to rogerwhitney.com, click on You Ask, I Answer, and let me know what you think about the Agile retirement management process and how it might work for you. Until next week, this is Roger Whitney, the Retirement Answer Man.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.